When it comes to osteoporosis, the recommendations are pretty narrow because in our conventional system, as I've described before, we really only have, as doctors, drugs, procedures. That's kind of what we have to offer. And if you look at the guidelines, that's what's in there, right? Now, so I'm going to exclude the fracture and the procedure part, but we'll just talk about the pharmaceuticals. So there are few areas in medicine where the drugs are less accepted by patients with the quote-unquote disease of osteoporosis, less accepted in this space than most other spaces because there's a lot of fear around these drugs. And rightfully so, because the drugs do have some potential side effects, some serious risks, but the doctors in the conventional system are just trying to prevent fracture. I also, as a doctor in this space, am trying to prevent fracture. When you're using the drugs, though, you have to understand what the long-term plan is, and this is where the drugs kind of fall short. So the pharmaceutical industry has done a reasonable job of looking at how to prevent fracture using these compounds. And there's a couple of different versions of these drugs out there, and I'm not going to go into great detail. But basically, there's a group of drugs that slow down bone loss called anti-resorptive. So it slows down how your cells are breaking down the bone. And then there's a group of drugs that kind of build up bone metabolism. So they're called anabolics. They build up bone. The challenge with all of these drugs is that there is not a long-term approach if you're talking about a lifespan of more than 10, 20 years, because the main class of drugs, the guidelines say to start with the bisphosphonate drugs like Fosamax or Reclast in the US. These drugs can only be used for 3 years, maybe 6 years for high-risk individuals, and then you have to do something else. The other big drug here is called Prolia. Prolia is a drug that has safety data out to 10 years, and there's plenty of people who are on it after that, but even then, that might be reasonable if your lifespan is another 10 years, another 20 years, but what if you're a 50-year-old woman? What if you're a 40-year-old guy who's had low testosterone for years, and now you have osteoporosis as a 40-year-old guy, and your doctor is saying, hey, you should go on this drug, and you might ask the question, well, what am I going to do when I'm 50, when I'm 60? And there's not a great answer to that. So there's definitely a time and a place for these drugs, and I would love to get into the details of that, but I don't want to spend that time here. But I always ask my patients if they're working with another doctor and we're kind of doing this together, or in our community if they're working with their doctors, ask what the long-term plan is. Because the last thing you want to do is go on a drug and then at the end of that time, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, have to go on potentially another drug and then another drug, and then you're continuing to have a negative impact on your bone metabolism and you're not actually able to build bone, which is ultimately what we want to do to prevent fracture for the long term. So I always look at this through the lens of health span, through the lens of longevity. If my patient's 50, I want to know what can I do to protect her for the next 50 years, not the next 3 years. And this is a totally different perspective, and this is where Health 3.0 comes in. I want to protect you for the next 50 years with the data that I have now. So then let's get into the next part of where I feel the conventional medical model starts to fail a disease like osteoporosis, which is actually in what I think the treatment should be. Now, we know that the guidelines will talk about drug therapy, as they do, because that's what the system is designed around. There are also recommendations to talk about supplements like calcium and vitamin D. There's recommendations for weight-bearing exercise, and that's all fine and well, but they're not very well defined. And when it comes to treatment, from my perspective, from a health span perspective, we really need to dig into the health pyramid that I've described before. I'll describe it again. But we have to start with the lifestyle pieces, and we have to be specific so that they are actionable. So osteoporosis is such a great example of a scenario where all of the lifestyle pieces get really controversial really fast. This is one of the things I love about this space. So let's just go through the blocks. So I've described our health optimization pyramid before. I'm sure we have a picture of it somewhere. But at the bottom of the pyramid, there's really 4 pillars, right? Nutrition, exercise, sleep, and mindset. So let's run through each of those 4 quickly. With bone health, from a nutrition perspective, there's a lot of information in this space. And one of the things that really stands out to me is this discussion around pH balance of your diet and of your body. And the theory goes like this, that if you eat an acid-forming diet or a quote-unquote acidic diet, then it's going to leach calcium out of your bones. And I've heard this for years. Even in medical school, I heard this idea that we have to alkalize or die. We have to alkalize our body, eat alkalizing foods, otherwise you're going to be acidic and it's going to have a negative impact. And it's always seemed a little fishy to me. So when I got into this space and I started working with patients, they were following these pH balanced diets. And as a result of these recommendations, they're always eating a low protein diet. And I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of the pH thing, but I've looked at this in depth because there are some studies in petri dishes and in small animals that if you feed them a quote unquote acid forming diet, which is a protein deficient diet by definition, but if you do that and they're calcium deficient, they will leach calcium from their bones. So this is where the theory comes from. But there are multiple studies, intervention studies, large cohort studies that if you look at this in human populations, then it doesn't pan out. It never pans out because we're not rats, we're not mice, and we don't live in a petri dish. In the real world, if you restrict protein, you're gonna lose bone. So I encourage people to get away from this pH model, which again, there's people all over the place that talk about this, trying to sell products and diet plans and whatever. But if you can get away from that, just ignore that. Focus on the things that really matter. If we want to build muscle and bone, which is ultimately our goal here, if we want to build muscle and bone, we have to have the building blocks. The building blocks are protein and minerals, yes, but generally this isn't a calcium problem. This is a protein problem for a lot of people. We need to eat adequate protein. I'm not going to tell you what your protein needs should be. We kind of float around 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight, but it's going to fluctuate depending on your background, your diet, how much food you're actually consuming, your gut health, etc. So 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight is sort of a ballpark. That might be a little high for a lot of people. So again, I can't tell you exactly what you should eat, but that's sort of the ballpark we're aiming at, 0.8 to 1 grams per pound of ideal body weight. Outside of that, we just need to make sure that we're getting all of the macronutrients and micronutrients that we need. The minerals, the vitamins, as much as we can from whole foods, trying to avoid ultra-processed foods. Notice I didn't say anything about being a vegan or being a carnivore or following a Mediterranean diet, any of the labels that you want to put on food beliefs. I've been doing this long enough in this space that I'm here to tell you that you can follow whatever belief you want, except for maybe the pH one, but you can follow whatever belief you want, live that lifestyle, and achieve adequate protein intake and probably improve your muscle and bone. Not all ways of eating are right for all people. I think that's probably pretty clear. But outside of that, I'm not here to tell you to eat a certain way. What I would say is it's important that we do track food, at least to some extent, so we know what we're getting and then we know what to supplement. And I'll talk about supplements later. So then the next thing is exercise. And oddly, this is an area where, again, there's so much controversy in exercise around bone health. Most people that get a diagnosis of osteoporosis are then told, hey, you should be careful, don't lift anything heavy, but you need to do weight-bearing exercise and resistance training because that's going to build your bone. People walk out of their office, like the doctor's office, and they're like, well, wait, what? Like, what did you just tell me to do? You said don't, but then do. Now I don't know what to do. And so a lot of times what happens is they end up doing nothing because they're afraid to do anything. I actually hold a masterclass on this regularly, and one of the questions I ask to the group every week, this is an international audience, I say, what are the things that you're not doing that you want to be doing? And many of them will say exercise. People back away from the things that they want to do because they're afraid they're going to fracture. And for some of them, they might be right, but for many of them, they're not. And if we're going to build muscle and bone, we have to do the things that we know are going to build muscle and bone. It's resistance training and some kind of impact, whether it be really impact if you can tolerate that safely, or some kind of simulated impact, and I'll talk about different ways to do that. But it has to be those two things, and then in addition to the other things that you like, and that might be yoga, that might be Pilates. It could be a lot of things that have a lot of potential value and benefit, but we have to do the things that are going to build bone first if we are starting in that place. If we're trying to prevent bone loss, maybe you don't need to do as much of that, but we need to monitor it over time. Now, I think with sleep, I think with mindset, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but clearly we have to sleep. We'll talk about sleep in detail, I'm sure, in another podcast. Mindset, same thing. You have to have the right mindset that you can improve your bone metabolism, that you can improve your bone health, that you can eat the right diet. All of those things are really important, but again, this is a topic for another day. It's a big one.